I found out my own brother had written me off for dead while I was lying in the hospital bed he was standing over, because I heard him say it out loud, and he did not know I could hear. They tell you a man in a coma hears nothing. They are wrong. I don't know what I heard and what I only assembled later. The mind does strange things in the dark. But I know this. I know it the way I know my own name, that at some point in the weeks I spent somewhere between this world and the next, I heard my younger brother Sean's voice, close to my ear, and I heard him say to another man, quietly, the way you speak near the dead. The doctors say even if he wakes up, he'll never run anything again. We have to move now, Trevor, before it's too late. And the other voice, my business partner Trevor's voice, said, Anna won't sign anything. She still thinks he's coming back. And my brother said, then we go around Anna. And then the dark took me again. Stay with me, because when I clawed my way back up out of that dark, months later, and the world swam into focus, and I was weak as a newborn and could barely speak, the first coherent thought I had, the thought that pulled me the rest of the way back, was that I had heard something in the dark that I was not supposed to hear, and that my brother and my partner had spent the months of my absence dividing the company I built among themselves, and that they had made one catastrophic mistake, which was assuming that a man who cannot move and cannot speak has also stopped being the man who built the fortress they were now trapped inside. They divided my company while I lay dying. They never once suspected that I had built it years before so that dying couldn't give it to them. My name is David Keller, and I built a technology company called Corvus, and I want to tell you the whole of what happened, from the accident to the reckoning, because I think there is a specific horror that almost no one talks about, the horror of finding out after the fact who the people around you became the moment they believed you were gone. Most of us go our whole lives without ever really knowing. We die or we don't, and either way we never get to see how the people we trusted behaved in the room when they thought we couldn't see them. I got to see. I got the rarest and most terrible gift there is, which is to stand at my own funeral while still breathing, to watch the people I loved most divide my life among themselves, and then to walk back into the room and ask them to explain. So let me tell you what I saw and what I did, and let me tell you who my brother turned out to be and my partner, and more important, who my wife turned out to be, because that part, the part about Anna, is the part that saved me, and it is the part one wants you to carry more than any of the rest. Let me start with the company, because you have to understand what was at stake and, more importantly, how I had built it, because the how is the whole hinge of this story. I started Corvus 24 years ago in a way that is not glamorous and does not matter except that it was mine, from nothing, and over 2.5 decades I built it into one of the most successful technology companies in our part of the country, the kind of company whose software runs quietly inside systems you use every day without ever knowing our name. I was the founder, the chief executive, the one who had bet everything and built it. And I owned it, controlled it, in a specific way that I need to explain to you because it is going to matter enormously. I want you to understand what building Corvus actually cost, because that cost is why the betrayal cut the way it did. There were years early on when I did not take a salary so that I could make payroll for the people who believed in me. There was a period when Anna and I remortgaged our house, twice, to keep the company alive, when we ate rice and beans and told Grace it was an adventure. There were 1,000 nights I did not sleep, 1,000 problems I solved by sheer refusal to quit, 1,000 times the smart money said this thing would fail, and I kept it alive with nothing but will and the belief that I was building something that would matter and last. 24 years of that. 24 years of my one and only life, poured, every drop, into this company. Corvus was not just an asset to me, not just a source of wealth, it was the physical record of my entire adult existence, the thing I had made out of my own days, the proof that a nobody with an idea could build something real. So when Trevor and Sean looked at my unconscious body and saw, in the company I had bled 24 years to build, merely a thing to be liquidated for their own enrichment, they were not just trying to take an asset from me. They were trying to take my life, the actual substance of it, the made thing that was the meaning of all those sleepless nights and skipped salaries and remortgaged years, and hand it to a private equity firm to be chopped up for parts. That is why the vault mattered so much to me, why I had built it out of something close to dread. I was not protecting money. I was protecting the meaning of my own existence from people who saw it as inventory. And when the truck came, the thing I had built to protect my life's work protected it, and I have never been more grateful for an act of fear in my life. When Corvus was young and I was raising money to grow it, I did a thing that most founders are too optimistic or too naive to do, which is that I thought hard about the ways I could lose control of the thing I was building, and I structured against every one of them. I took investment, which meant giving up economic ownership, so that over the years my actual share of the profits shrank to well under half. But I never, ever gave up control because I had structured the company with two classes of stock, and I held the founders class, the supervoting class, the shares that carried 10 votes each to everyone else's one, which meant that even as my economic stake fell below half, my voting control never did. I could be outvoted on nothing. The company could not be sold, could not remove me, could not do anything of significance without my vote, and my vote, because of the structure, was always the deciding one. Trevor knew this. Everyone knew this. It was not a secret. What was a secret, what I had done 2 years before the accident and told almost no one, is the thing that saved me, and I will come to it because you have to understand the betrayal first to understand why the fortress mattered. Let me tell you about Trevor Kane, my partner. Trevor came to Corvus about 15 years ago, and he was brilliant, genuinely brilliant at the things I was not, the operations, the finance, the deal-making, the smooth corporate machinery that I found tedious and he found delicious. I made him my chief operating officer and then effectively my second in command, and I gave him a real stake and real authority, and for 15 years we were a formidable pair, the founder with the vision and the operator with the machine, and I trusted him. I want to be honest about how completely I trusted him, because the completeness of it is the measure of the betrayal. I trusted Trevor Kane to run the company if I was traveling, to speak for me, to act in my stead. I had, in fact, over the years signed various instruments that gave Trevor operational authority in my absence, because that is what you do with a trusted second. You make it possible for the machine to run when you're not there. I never imagined those instruments would become the tools someone used to try to take the machine itself. But that is exactly what a trusted second is positioned to do, and it is exactly what Trevor did the moment he believed I was never coming back. I want to be fair to the 15 years because they were real, or I believe they were, and the reality of them is part of what makes the ending so hard to hold. Trevor and I were not just partners, we were friends, or something I mistook for friends. We had traveled together, closed deals together, sat up late in hotel bars in strange cities solving problems that felt, at the time, like the most important things in the world. I had been at his second wedding. He had given a toast at my daughter's engagement party, a good one, funny and warm, in which he called me the brother he chose, and I remember being moved by it. Remember thinking how lucky I was to have built not just a company but a partnership that had become a friendship, a bond. I had, over those 15 years, turned down other opportunities, other paths, partly because I did not want to leave Trevor, did not want to break up a thing that worked so well and felt so good. I trusted him with the machine because I trusted him with my life, and I did not draw a distinction between those two kinds of trust. And that failure to draw the distinction is, I now understand, the exact error that nearly killed me. Because there is a kind of man who is genuinely warm, genuinely good company, genuinely bonded to you in every daily way, and who will still, when the stakes get high enough and he thinks he can get away with it, sell you for parts. And the terrible thing about that kind of man is that the warmth is not even fake exactly, it is just that the warmth was never load-bearing. It was a pleasant feature of the good times that simply switches off the instant the calculation changes. Trevor liked me. I am fairly sure Trevor liked me right up until the moment a truck hit my car and liking me stopped being the profitable position. And then he set the liking down as easily as you set down a coffee cup and picked up the knife, and I have had to learn to live with the knowledge that a man can genuinely enjoy your company for 15 years and still do sums over your dying body, and that enjoying your company and being loyal to you are two entirely different things that happen to look identical until the day they don't. And let me tell you about my brother, Sean, because his part is the one that still, even now, after everything, catches in my throat. Sean is my younger brother by 6 years, and I raised him almost as much as our parents did because our father was mostly absent and our mother worked herself to exhaustion. And I was the one who looked out for Sean, who taught him to drive, who covered for him, who bailed him out of the scrapes he got into because Sean was always a little lost, a little weak, a little too eager to be liked by the wrong people. And when Corvus succeeded, I did what an older brother does. I brought Sean in, gave him a good job, a title bigger than he'd earned, a salary that let him live well, a place in something successful because I wanted my little brother to have the security and the pride that our childhood never gave either of us. I lifted Sean up. Everything Sean had, he had because of me, and I gave it gladly the way you give to a brother without keeping score. I never dreamed I was raising the man who would one day stand over my dying body and say, "We go around Anna." But I had spent my whole life lifting Sean up, and it turned out I had lifted him just high enough to reach for my throat. Let me give you one memory of Sean so the betrayal weighs what it should. When Sean was 17, he got into real trouble, the kind that could have followed him for life, a stupid thing, a bad crowd, A night that went wrong, and our parents were useless, our father gone and our mother too exhausted and too frightened to know what to do. And it was me, 23 years old and barely holding my own life together, who drove all night to get my brother, who talked to the people who needed talking to, who spent money I did not have and called in favors I could not afford, and who got Sean out of it clean, no record, no shadow on his future. And afterward, in the car, driving home as the sun came up, Sean cried and said he didn't deserve me, said he'd never be able to pay me back, and I told him what I believed with my whole heart, which was that brothers don't keep a ledger, that I would always come for him, always, no matter what, no matter how far he fell, because that is what it means to be someone's brother, that there is at least one person in the world who will always, always come. I meant it. I lived it. For 30 years, I was the person who always came for Sean. And the terrible symmetry of this story, the thing I cannot stop turning over, is that when the situation reversed, when it was me who was down, me who needed someone to drive through the night and refused to give up, Sean did not come. Sean did the opposite of coming. Sean stood over the brother who had always come for him and calculated how to profit from his death. I taught Sean at 17 that brothers come for each other. He learned a different lesson somewhere along the way, or maybe never really learned mine at all, just accepted the rescues and mistook them for his due. And the gap between the brother I was to him and the brother he was to me is a wound I do not think will ever fully close, because it is not really a wound about a company, it is a wound about what I thought love was and what it turned out for him to be worth. Now let me tell you about Anna, because Anna is the sun this whole dark story orbits. And I need you to know who she is before I tell you what she did, which was save everything. Anna is my wife of 31 years. She was there before Corvus, before any of it, when I was nobody with an idea, and she believed in me when there was no evidence at all that she should, and she has been, for 31 years, the single steadiest and truest thing in my life. Anna never much cared about the company, the money, the success, except as they made me happy. She cared about me, the actual man, and she saw me all the way through, the way only a person who loved you before you or anybody can see you. We had built a life, Anna and I, and a daughter, Grace, who was grown by the time of the accident and as fierce and clear-eyed as her mother. I tell you about the strength of Anna and Grace now because you are going to need to know it was there, waiting, when the betrayal came, because the thing my brother and my partner never factored into their calculations, the variable that ruined all their arithmetic, was the ferocity of a woman who loved me and would not, under any pressure, any argument, any threat, agree to behave as though I were already gone. Let me give you one thing about Anna from the beginning so you understand the kind of steel that was under the warmth. When I started Corvus, we had almost nothing, and for the first 2 years it looked like it might fail, and I came home one night, early on, ready to quit, ready to go get a safe job and give up the whole dream, and I told Anna I thought we should be realistic, that maybe I wasn't the man to build a company, that maybe we should cut our losses. And Anna, who was pregnant with Grace at the time and had every reason to want the safe path, looked at me and said, "David, I did not marry a man who quits the first time it gets hard. I married a man who builds things. If you want to quit because you've stopped believing in the thing, that's one conversation. But if you want to quit because you're scared, that's a different one, and I'm not going to let you make the scared decision and call it the realistic one. Which is it?" And I sat with that, and it was fear, of course it was fear, and Anna knew it before I did, and she would not let me dress up my fear as wisdom, and I did not quit, and Corvus exists, and everything that came from it exists, because 31 years ago a pregnant woman refused to let her frightened husband quit. That is who Anna is. That is the steel that was under the warmth the whole time. And when the truck came and the vultures gathered and everyone told her to be realistic, to make the scared decision and call it wisdom, Anna did for me, unconscious in a bed, exactly what she'd done for me 31 years earlier at a kitchen table. She refused to let fear masquerade as realism. She held the line for the thing she believed in, which this time was not the company, it was me, it was the belief that I was coming back. And she was right that time too, the way she has been right. About the important things our whole life together. I did not marry a soft woman. I married a woman with a spine of iron wrapped in the warmest heart I have ever known. And the iron is the reason I am alive to tell you this. The accident happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening, on an ordinary road, in the ordinary rain. A truck, a wet road, a moment. I don't remember it. I remember leaving the office, and then I remember nothing for a long time, and the nothing is its own strange country that I have never been able to fully describe. What I know is what they told me later, that my car was struck, that I was pulled from it barely alive, that I had a severe traumatic brain injury and a body full of broken things, and that when they got me to the hospital the doctors told Anna to prepare herself, That even if I survived the night, which was not certain, I might never wake, and if I woke I might never be myself again. There is a cruel small detail about that night that I have never been able to shake. I had almost stayed at the office later. I had a decision half made to work another hour, and something, fatigue, a thought of Anna waiting, made me leave when I did, and if I had stayed that extra hour I would not have been on that road at that moment and the truck would have passed through empty space. A single ordinary choice, made without weight, the kind we make 100 times a day, put me in the path of the thing that nearly ended me, and I think about that sometimes, about how little separates the life we're living from the one where everything went differently, and it has made me hold my actual life more tightly because I understand now, in my body and not just my head, how thin the membrane is, how an ordinary Tuesday can become the hinge your whole existence turns on with no warning at all. The people who divided my company were, in a sense, betting on the thinness of that membrane, betting that I had slipped through to the other side of it and would not slip back. They forgot that a man who nearly dies and comes back is not weaker for the journey. He is, if anything, clarified by it, burned down to what actually matters, and a man who has been to the edge and returned is a far more dangerous adversary than the comfortable man he was before, because he has already lost everything once and knows now exactly what he is and is not afraid of. I was less afraid of Trevor and Sean after the coma than I would have been before it, because after you have stared into that dark, a man trying to steal your company is a very small and manageable kind of threat. I was in a coma for 11 weeks. 11 weeks in the dark. And it was during those 11 weeks, while my body lay in a bed and my wife held vigil and my daughter wept, that the people I trusted with everything looked at my still form and saw, not a tragedy, but an opportunity, and began, quietly, methodically, to take my life apart. I want to try to tell you what the dark was like, because people ask, and because it matters to the story, though I warn you I can only fail at it. It was not nothing, and it was not dreaming, and it was not the peaceful sleep people imagine. It was a vast, formless dark, mostly with no sense of time, no sense of self, even long stretches where I did not exist in any way I can describe. But it was not total. There were moments, islands, when something came through, a voice, a pressure on my hand, a fragment of the world reaching down into the dark and touching me, and I could not respond, could not move toward it, could not even hold on to it, but it registered. Somewhere, it left a mark. Most of what reached me was warmth, I understand now. Most of it was Anna, her voice, her hand, hours and hours of my wife talking to a body that could not answer, and some part of me down in the dark knew she was there, knew it the way you know the sun is up even with your eyes closed. But not all of what reached me was warm, because on at least one of those islands, at least one of those moments when the world came through, what came through was my brother's voice, close, low, and it did not feel like the warmth, it felt cold, it felt wrong. And I did not have the capacity down there to understand words, not really, but I carried something up out of the dark with me, a shape, a coldness, a wrongness attached to Sean's voice, and when Anna later told me what Sean had actually said and done, that shape I'd carried up snapped into focus and became words. We go around Anna, and I do not know, I will never know for certain, whether I truly heard those exact words or whether my recovering mind assembled them around the cold shape I'd brought back. And in the end it does not matter, because the coldness was real. I brought real coldness up out of that dark attached to my brother's voice, and the coldness turned out to be true. That is the part that haunts me. Not that I might have imagined it. That the thing I brought back from the edge of death, the one piece of the world that followed me up out of the dark and turned out to be cold, was my own brother. I want to tell you what happened during those 11 weeks, and I can tell you because I reconstructed all of it afterward, from Anna, from my loyal people, from documents, from the paper trail that betrayal always leaves, because betrayal requires paperwork. And I want you to listen to it as what it is, which is a portrait of what people become when they are certain the person they are betraying will never be able to hold them accountable. Because that is the true subject of this story, not the company. The company was just the stage. The true subject is what a human being will do when they believe, with total certainty, that you will never open your eyes again. Trevor moved first and fast, and I have to admit, in the cold way you can admire a thing that is trying to kill you, that it was well executed. Within days of the accident, before the swelling in my brain had even peaked, Trevor had begun operating as though he were already in charge, invoking the operational authorities I had given him over the years, the instruments meant for a 2-week business trip now stretched to cover a permanent absence. He reassured the board, the employees, the investors with grave and sorrowful competence, that he would steady the ship in this terrible time, and he positioned himself flawlessly as the loyal partner stepping up under tragic circumstances, and no one questioned it, because why would they? Because that is exactly what a loyal partner would do. And the thing about the smooth ones is that their betrayal looks identical, from the outside to devotion. But Trevor was not steadying the ship. Trevor was seizing it. Because Trevor understood something that gave his actions a terrible urgency, which was that I still legally controlled Corvus through my supervoting shares, and that as long as I was merely incapacitated rather than legally, permanently, formally declared unable to ever return, those shares and their control were frozen in limbo, doing nothing, and Trevor could run the company day to day, but he could not do the one thing he actually wanted to do, which was sell it. Because that was the plan I would learn. Trevor had, in the months before my accident, been quietly courting a private equity firm called Sterling Partners who wanted to buy Corvus, roll it up with other holdings, and cash everyone out, a deal I had refused repeatedly and absolutely, because I had not spent 24 years building a company in order to feed it to a firm that would gut it for parts and lay off the people who built it. Trevor wanted that deal. Trevor wanted the enormous personal payout it would bring him. And I was the only obstacle. I had always been the only obstacle. My supervoting control was the wall the deal could never get past. And then a truck hit my car on a rainy Tuesday, and the wall, from Trevor's point of view, had suddenly developed a door, and all he had to do to open it was get me formally, permanently removed so that my frozen shares could be dealt with, so that control could pass, so that the deal I had blocked with my living body could finally be done over my absent one. And to do that, Trevor needed two things. He needed my family's cooperation, and he needed me declared legally and permanently gone. That is where my brother came in. And that is the part one have to make myself tell you, because it is the part that still, on the bad nights, makes it hard to breathe. Trevor could not get to my shares through Anna, because Anna held my power of attorney, along with my attorney, and Anna would not cooperate with anything that treated me as gone. So Trevor needed a way around Anna, and the way around Anna was a legal proceeding to have me declared permanently incapacitated and to appoint a conservator over my affairs, someone who would then have legal authority over my interests, someone who could be persuaded, unlike my wife, to see reason, to see the wisdom of the Sterling deal, to unlock what my living will had frozen. And to bring that kind of proceeding, to stand up in front of a court and argue that David Keller was permanently gone and his wife was not acting in his best interest, Trevor needed a member of the family, someone with standing, someone whose betrayal would wear the mask of concern. He needed Sean, and Sean said yes. My brother, the boy I raised. Sean agreed to petition a court to have me declared permanently incapacitated, to argue that his own brother was never coming back, and most monstrous of all, to suggest that my wife, my Anna, who had not left my bedside in weeks, was too emotionally compromised to make sound decisions, and that control of my affairs should pass to a conservator who, by no coincidence at all, would be friendly to Trevor and the Sterling deal. Sean signed his name to a legal document that said his brother was as good as dead and his brother's wife could not be trusted. He did it for money. Trevor had promised him, I would later learn, a substantial piece of the deal proceeds, a finder's fee for delivering the family, and Sean, my lost weak little brother, whom I had lifted his whole life, looked at my body in that bed and did the arithmetic and decided that his brother dead was worth more to him than his brother alive, and he signed. That is the thing I heard or half heard or assembled from the dark. We go around Anna. He meant, we go around my wife by declaring me dead in the eyes of the law so that we can sell the thing I built, so that Sean can be paid for helping bury me while I still breathed. Now let me tell you what Anna did, because this is where the darkness meets something it could not overcome, and I cannot tell it without my voice doing something, even now. Anna did not break. That is the whole of it, and it is everything. My wife, exhausted, terrified, grieving a husband who lay unresponsive week after week, being told by doctors to prepare for the worst, being worked on by Trevor with his grave, sorrowful competence and by Sean with his performance of a brother's anguish, both of them pressing her, gently at first and then not gently, to be realistic, to think about the future, to consider that David would want the company taken care of, to sign, just to sign, to let the grown-ups handle it. Anna looked at all of it and all of them, and she said no. She said no, and she kept saying no, and when they brought her documents she did not sign them, and when they brought her lawyers she got her own, and when Sean filed his petition to have me declared incapacitated and to push her aside, Anna did not collapse, she went to war. Because Anna knew something that Trevor and Sean, in their certainty that I was finished, had discounted entirely, which was that I was not a man who left things to chance, and that if I had built a company I had surely built it to protect itself, and that her job, the last and most important job of 31 years of marriage, was simply to hold the line, to refuse to let them do anything irreversible, to keep the door shut until either I came back or the truth came out. And she held it. For 11 weeks and then longer, my wife held the line against my brother and my partner with nothing but her refusal and her love and her absolute, unshakable faith that the man she married had left away, and she was right. I had. Anna told me later about one particular evening, and I make myself carry it because it is the measure of what she did. About 6 weeks in, when the doctors were at their least hopeful and the pressure was at its worst, Trevor and Sean came to the hospital together, not to sit with me, but to sit with Anna in the awful family lounge with its vending machines and its fluorescent light. And they came, she said, with a lawyer, and they were very kind, very gentle, very concerned, and they laid it out for her, how the company was suffering without leadership, how the employees were frightened, how the thing David would want, was to let Trevor formalize his control so the business could be protected. And all Anna had to do was sign, just acknowledge reality. And Sean took her hand. My brother took my wife's hand and said, "Anna, I love him too. This is killing me too. But we have to face it. He's not coming back. And he'd hate watching everything he built fall apart because we couldn't accept it." And Anna, exhausted, alone, 6 weeks into a vigil, looked at my brother holding her hand and telling her I was gone. And she told me she does not know where the words came from. She said, "Get out, both of you, and take your lawyer. My husband is in that room, alive, and I am not going to sit in a lounge and let the two of you plan his estate while his heart is still beating. I know what you're doing. I may be tired and I may be scared, but I am not stupid, and I know exactly what you are doing, and the answer is no, and it is going to keep being no. And if you come at me again, I will make sure everyone in that company knows what the two of you were doing at David's bedside while he fought for his life. Now get out." And they got out. My wife, at the lowest and most frightened moment of her life, threw my brother and my partner and their lawyer out of a hospital lounge and held the line alone for weeks more after that. And I did not know any of it was happening. I was in the dark, and she never once wavered. And when people ask me why I structured everything to survive my own incapacity, why I built the vault, I tell them the truth, which is that I built the lock, but Anna was the one who guarded the door, and a lock without a guard is just a puzzle for a patient thief. And Anna made sure the thieves never had the piece to work the puzzle. And between my lock and her guarding, they never had a chance, and neither of those two things alone would have been enough. Because here is the thing I did 2 years before the accident, the thing almost no one knew, the fortress inside the fortress. I had watched, some years earlier, a founder I admired get destroyed, pushed out of his own company during an illness by partners who exploited his incapacity. And it had frightened me in a way I couldn't shake, and out of that fear I had done something that felt, at the time, almost paranoid, and that turned out to be the single wisest act of my life. I had taken my supervoting shares, the control shares, and I had placed their voting power into an irrevocable voting trust, directed by the one human being on earth I trusted completely and who could not be bought, my attorney and oldest friend, Howard Stein. And the instructions to that trust were precise and, crucially, they were locked, unchangeable, triggered automatically by my incapacity. The instructions said, if David is ever incapacitated, Howard, as trustee, is to vote these shares for one purpose only, which is to preserve the status quo, to block any sale, to block any change of control, to block any removal of David or any fundamental change to the company, to take no affirmative action of any kind, to freeze the company exactly as it was, and to keep it frozen no matter who asks, no matter what court says, no matter what a conservator or the board or anyone else attempts, until one thing and only one thing happens, which is that David personally recovers, is examined and found to have regained capacity, and himself resumes control. In plain words, I had built a machine that, the instant I went down, would lock the entire company in place and throw away the key, and the only key that could ever unlock it was me, awake in myself again. Trevor and Sean spent 11 weeks trying to seize a company that had, automatically, the moment my car was struck, sealed itself shut around my absence like a vault, and they never even knew the vault had closed, because they were so busy trying to pick the lock on the front door that they never noticed the whole building had already turned to stone. If you have listened this far, let me stop and ask you the question I have carried since I understood what my brother did. Because it is the hardest one in this whole story, and I do not have a clean answer. When someone betrays you, a partner, a stranger, even a friend, there is a kind of clean grief to it. You can be angry, you can cut them off. But when the one who betrays you is the person you raised, the brother you lifted your whole life, the one whose every good thing came from your own hands, What do you even do with that? Is it a betrayal, or is it somehow a failure of your own for having raised a person capable of it? I have gone around and around on it, and I want to know where you land, so tell me in the comments, because I think many of you have a Sean in your life, someone you gave everything to who reached for your throat the moment your back was turned, and I think we all need to hear each other on this, on what you owe a brother who tried to bury you, and whether the answer is different because he's blood. Stay with me, because I woke up, and when I woke up, the vault was still sealed, and I was the only one who could open it, and I had a great deal to decide that I woke slowly, over days, surfacing and sinking, and the first face I truly registered, the anchor that pulled me the rest of the way up, was Anna's, gray with exhaustion. Asleep in a chair she had clearly slept in for weeks, her hand around mine even in sleep. And when she woke and saw my eyes open and focused, saw me actually there, actually back, my wife made a sound I had never heard a human being make, and I will not try to describe it, except to say that in that sound was every day of 11 weeks of a vigil she had kept alone against people trying to declare me dead. And it is a sound I will hear until the day I actually do die. I could not speak at first. I could barely move. The recovery was long and brutal, weeks of relearning my own body, my own speech, my own mind, and I want to be honest that in the early days I was in no condition to run anything, and that if the fortress had depended on my being immediately capable, it would have failed. But it didn't depend on that. It only depended on my eventually, in time, recovering enough to be examined and found to have my mind back, and I did, slowly, painfully, and every day that I got a little stronger was a day the vault stayed sealed and Trevor's deal stayed dead and the truth got closer to the surface. I do not want to romanticize the recovery, because it was the hardest thing I have ever done, and there was nothing noble feeling about it while it was happening. There were days I could not remember a word I needed, days my own hand would not do what I told it, days I wept from sheer frustration at being trapped in a body and a mind that had been mine my whole life and now would not obey me. And on the worst of those days, the days I wanted to give up, the days I thought maybe Trevor and Sean had been right, maybe I really was finished, it was my daughter Grace who would not let me quit, the same way Anna would not let me quit at that kitchen table 31 years earlier, because it turns out the steel breeds true. Grace, grown now, fierce as her mother, would sit with me through the brutal therapy sessions, and when I fumbled a word or failed a simple task and wanted to stop, she would say, "Again, Dad, you built a company from nothing. You can find the word for spoon. Again." And she would not let me feel sorry for myself, and she would not let me stop, and she told me once, in a moment I will never forget, "Dad, Uncle Sean and Trevor are out there right now betting you won't come all the way back. Every word you find is a word that proves them wrong. So find the word. Spite is a perfectly good reason to heal. Use it." And I laughed, the first real laugh since I'd woken, and I found the word, and I kept finding the words day after brutal day, and I healed all the way back, powered in no small part by a daughter who understood that sometimes when love isn't enough to get you off the mat, a little righteous spite will do the job, and that there is no shame in using whatever fuel gets you standing again. Grace fought for me while I slept, alongside her mother, and then she fought for me while I woke, refusing to let me stay broken. And if the story has a second hero after Anna, it is Grace, my fierce girl, who would not let her father be the diminished thing his betrayers needed him to be. And as I recovered enough to understand, Anna and Grace and my loyal people told me, gently, in pieces so as not to break me, what had happened while I was under. Anna told me about the pressure, the documents, the way Trevor and Sean had worked her. She told me, her voice shaking with a fury that 11 weeks had only compressed, about Sean's petition, about the argument that she was unfit, that I was gone. And I want to tell you about the moment she told me that my brother had signed a document declaring me permanently incapacitated and suggesting my wife could not be trusted, because I had been holding myself together through all of the revelations up to that point, absorbing Trevor's treachery with the grim understanding of a man who had always half known what Trevor was. But when Anna got to Sean, I felt something in my chest simply break, cleanly, like a bone, and I turned my face to the wall of that hospital room, and I wept for my brother, for the boy I raised, for the fact that somewhere in the dark I really had heard his voice saying, "We go around Anna," and it had been real, it had all been real, and the little brother I had spent my life protecting had looked at my dying body and seen a payday. That grief was worse than the accident. The truck only broke my body. Sean broke something that has never fully healed. But there were other things Anna told me, and I need you to hear these too, because a story that is only betrayal is a lie about how the world actually works. And the truth is that while some people showed me their worst in the dark, others showed me their best, and the others are the reason I am here. There was Nadia Rahman, my chief financial officer, who had been with me for a decade, and who, when Trevor began his maneuvering, did not go along, did not stay safely silent, but quietly became a problem for him, questioning his authority to take certain actions, preserving records, documenting everything, and, crucially, getting word to Howard Stein that something was very wrong. Nadia risked her career, her livelihood, everything to be loyal to a man everyone told her was never coming back. And she did it for no reward, with no guarantee I would ever wake to thank her, because it was right and because she was who she was. Nadia told me much later about the moment she decided, because there was a moment, there always is. A few weeks into my coma, Trevor called her into his office and he told her warmly that he valued her, that he saw a big future for her in the new Corvus, that she was exactly the kind of forward-thinking executive the company would need as it moved into its next chapter. And then he asked her, in that same warm voice, to sign off on some financial authorizations, routine things, he said, just cleaning up so the business could keep moving during the transition. And Nadia looked at the authorizations, and she understood immediately that they were not routine, that they were pieces of the machinery Trevor was building to move control. And she understood that Trevor was doing to her exactly what smooth men do, offering her a place on the winning side in exchange for her signature and her silence. And she understood that this was the fork, that she could sign and be rewarded and be safe, or she could refuse and become, in an instant, an obstacle to a powerful man who would remember it. And Nadia, a woman with a mortgage and a family and everything to lose, looked at Trevor's warm smile and his promising future, and she said, I don't think David would authorize these, and David isn't dead, so I'm going to wait until he can tell me himself. And she did not sign. And she walked out of that office knowing she had just made a powerful enemy on behalf of a man who might never wake to know she'd done it. And she went back to her desk and started, quietly, keeping copies of everything, building the record that would one day become my case, because she had decided, in the space of one conversation, which kind of person she was going to be, and it was the kind who does the right thing in the dark, with no audience and no guarantee of reward, which is the only kind of right thing that actually counts. When people say loyalty is dead, that no one does the hard right thing anymore, I think of Nadia Rahman refusing to sign in that office, alone, with everything to lose and a man everyone said was gone. And I know it isn't true that loyalty is not dead, it is just quiet and it does not announce itself, and you usually only find out who has it after the dark has come and gone. And there was Howard, my old friend, the trustee who held the vault sealed against every pressure Trevor and Sean could bring, who fielded their lawyers and their arguments and their veiled threats and simply, immovably said no, the trust is clear, the trust is irrevocable, the answer is no, and who visited me in the hospital not to get anything from me but simply to sit with his unconscious friend. And Anna told me to tell my sleeping body every visit, hold on, David. The wall's holding. Just come back. The wall's holding. And there was Anna, and there was Grace, my fierce women, who fought a war for me while I slept and never once, not for a single day, agreed to bury me. When I added up, and I have added it up many times, the ledger of who I turned out to be surrounded by, I find that the people I trusted most, Trevor and Sean, betrayed me utterly, and the people I perhaps valued a notch below them in the daily run of life, Nadia and Howard and, above all, Anna, turned out to be made of something the betrayers couldn't imagine. And there is a lesson in that about where loyalty actually lives that I will come back to at the end. Now let me tell you what I did when I was strong enough, because I did not rush it, and the not rushing was the whole of the strategy. Every instinct I had, in those first weeks of recovery, screamed at me to act, to call Trevor, to call Sean, to storm back and throw the truth in their faces. And I did none of it, because I had learned the same lesson every careful man in every one of these stories learns, which is that the satisfying move and the winning move are almost never the same. I was weak. My body and my mind were still rebuilding. If I moved too soon, before I was medically, provably, unassailably recovered, I would hand Trevor and Sean exactly the ammunition their whole scheme depended on. The argument that David is not really back, David is impaired, David cannot be trusted to run anything, look at him, he can barely speak. So I did the hardest thing, which was to be patient, to heal fully first, to say nothing to my betrayers, to let them continue to believe, for a while longer, that they were winning, that I was a vegetable in a bed and the vault would eventually crack. I let Trevor keep pushing his sterling deal, keep telling the board and the buyers that the founder's incapacity would soon be formalized and the obstacle removed. I let Sean's petition grind forward. I let them keep building their case, keep committing themselves on paper, keep digging, because every day they spent believing I was gone was a day they exposed themselves further. And I intended, when I finally stood up, to be so completely, medically, verifiably recovered that there would be no argument left, no doubt to exploit, nothing for them to do but watch the vault open in the one hand that could open it. And I used the waiting. Quietly, from my recovery, working with Howard and Nadia, I assembled the whole picture, every document, every board communication, every step of Trevor's sterling maneuvering, every filing in Sean's incapacity petition, the promise finder's fee, all of it, the complete architecture of what they had done while they believed I couldn't see. Nadia had preserved everything. Howard had documented everything. Anna had witnessed everything. By the time I was ready to stand up, I did not merely have my company back. I had a complete, dated, evidentiary record of exactly who had done exactly what in the dark, and I had it precisely because they had been so certain I would never wake to read it. The confidence that I was finished was the very thing that made them careless, and their carelessness was my case. This is worth sitting with because it is a principle that goes far beyond my particular story. People who believe they will never be caught do not cover their tracks, because covering your tracks is exhausting and only worth doing if you think someone might follow them. Trevor and Sean were so completely certain that I was gone, that the witness was permanently silenced, that they conducted their betrayal in writing, in emails, in filings, in promised payments, in a paper trail a mile long. Because why would you be careful when the only person who could ever use the evidence against you is lying brain-dead in a hospital bed? Their certainty of my absence was the exact thing that made them document their own crime. And I have come to believe this is nearly always true, that the people who wrong you when they think you're powerless are, in that very moment, creating the evidence that will undo them, because the confidence required to betray someone openly is the same confidence that makes them sloppy. And if you can simply survive, simply come back, simply be there to collect what their arrogance left lying around, the case builds itself. So I collected, quietly, patiently, from my sickbed and then my recovery, with Howard and Nadia, I gathered every careless artifact of their certainty that I was finished. And I want you to understand that I felt, doing it, a strange, grim gratitude toward their arrogance, because a more careful pair of traitors who had entertained even the possibility that I might return, would have left me far less to work with. Trevor and Sean handed me their own conviction because they could not conceive of me as a future reader of their present actions, and their failure of imagination was the largest gift they ever gave me. When I was ready, medically cleared, formally examined and found to have fully regained my capacity, which meant that under the terms of the trust the vault would open at my touch and mine alone, I did not send a warning. I simply came back. I had Howard convene a full meeting of the Corvus board, and I had it convened for a purpose that was described only as a governance matter, and I made sure that Trevor would be there, and I made sure, through channels, that Sean would be there too, present as a party to the incapacity proceeding, and then, on the appointed morning, months after a truck had hit my car on a rainy Tuesday, I walked into the boardroom of the company I built, on my own 2 feet, thinner and grayer and moving. Carefully but unmistakably, provably myself, and I watched the faces of the 2 men who had buried me discover that the grave was empty. Walking back into that building was its own strange resurrection, and I want to tell you what it felt like, because it was not triumphant, not the way you might imagine. I walked through the lobby of the company I had built from nothing, past the reception desk and the wall with our name on it, and people who worked for me, ordinary people, the engineers and the assistants and the ones in the mailroom, began to stop and stare, because the word had gone around that the founder was dead or as good as, and here he was walking, and I watched something move through that building ahead of me like a wave, a kind of disbelieving joy, and people came out of there. Offices, and some of them were crying, and one young woman I barely knew put her hand over her mouth and said, "Mr. Keller," like she was seeing a ghost, which in a way she was. And I understood, walking through that wave of ordinary people's uncomplicated gladness, that I was alive. Something about the difference between them and the 2 men waiting in the boardroom. These people, who had nothing to gain from my return, who would not get a dime more whether I lived or died, were simply humanly glad, because I had treated them well for 24 years and they were good people, and a good man they thought was dead had walked back through the door. And the 2 men who had the most to gain from my presence, my partner and my brother, the 2 who owed me the most, were the only 2 people in that building who were not glad to see me alive. That contrast told me everything, walking in, about how upside down the thing had been, that the people who owed me nothing loved me and the people who owed me everything had tried to bury me, and I carried that contrast into the boardroom like a strange kind of strength, because it reminded me, right at the moment I needed reminding, that I was not walking into a room full of my enemies, I was walking into a building full of people glad I was alive, to deal with exactly 2 who weren't. I wish I could describe Trevor's face when I walked in. He had built his entire scheme, staked his reputation and his fortune and his future on the certainty that I was gone, and he looked up from the head of the table, my table, where he had been sitting for months, and he saw me walk through the door under my own power, and I watched the blood leave his face. I watched him understand in a single second that every assumption his plan rested on had just walked into the room and was looking at him. And Sean, my brother, Sean made a sound, a small broken sound, and could not look at me and stared at the table because Sean, unlike Trevor, had to reckon not just with a failed scheme but with the fact that the brother he had tried to declare dead was standing there having heard. Somehow, in his bones, everything, and Sean knew it. I could see that he knew it, the way you know when someone has read your worst secret, that I did not shout. I have never once in this story shouted, and I did not begin with the people who had tried to bury me. I sat down, not at the head of the table where Trevor sat, but in an ordinary chair because I did not need the head of the table. The head of the table had never been where my power lived, and that was the entire lesson Trevor had never learned. And I said quietly to the room, I understand there's been some question about whether I'm coming back. I wanted to settle it in person. And then Howard, beside me, laid it out for the board, calmly, completely. He explained the voting trust. He explained that from the moment of my accident, control of Corvus had been locked, automatically, irrevocably, that nothing could have been sold or changed or done without my personal recovery, that the sterling deal Trevor had been marketing to them for months had never, at any point, been possible, that Trevor had been selling the board and the buyers a company he had no power to deliver, and that I had now, upon my medically certified recovery, resumed full control. And I watched the board understand that they had spent months following a man toward a transaction that could never have happened, and I watched them begin, one by one, to do the arithmetic of their own exposure, the way boards always do the instant the ground shifts. And then I did the thing I had waited months and healed a shattered body to be able to do. I laid the record on the table. I did not editorialize. I did not rage. I simply had the truth distributed, the whole documented architecture of it, Trevor's self-dealing, his side arrangement with Sterling, the finder's fee promise to Sean, the incapacity petition and its real purpose, the attempt to have my wife declared unfit, all of it dated, sourced, undeniable. And I said to the room, while I was in a coma, these two men attempted to sell this company out from under it, to seize control they had no right to, and to have me declared permanently gone and my wife pushed aside, for money. They failed because I built this company so that they would fail. But I want the board to see exactly who was in this room with them, so that you understand the decision I'm about to make. And the room saw, and there was nothing Trevor's smoothness could do against a dated paper record, because charm works on people and it does not work on documents. And Trevor sat there while the machine he had run for 15 years turned, page by page, into the evidence of his betrayal. He tried, of course. Men like Trevor always try because talking their way out of things is the only real skill they have, and they reach for it the way a drowning man reaches for anything. He tried, even then, even with the record on the table, to reframe it, to narrate it into something else. He said he had acted in good faith, in a crisis, to protect the company and its shareholders during a period of terrible uncertainty. He said that with me incapacitated indefinitely, someone had to make hard decisions, and that history would show he had done what leadership required. He was smooth, even drowning, and I watched a couple of the board members almost, for a moment, want to be persuaded, because being persuaded would have been easier than confronting what they'd been part of. And I let him finish because I have learned that letting a man like Trevor finish is more devastating than cutting him off. And then I said quietly, Trevor, if you'd acted in good faith, you'd have done everything in the open, with Anna, with Howard, with the family, in the light. You didn't. You promised my brother a secret finder's fee to help declare me dead. You concealed from this board and from Sterling that you had no power to sell. You tried to have my wife declared unfit. Good faith doesn't need secrets, Trevor. Only betrayal needs secrets. And you needed a lot of them. And I set down one more document, the one showing the promised payment to Sean, the secret one, and I watched the last of the board's willingness to be persuaded evaporate, because there is no innocent explanation for a secret payment to a man to help declare his brother permanently incapacitated. None, and Trevor knew it, and the room knew it, and Trevor stopped talking, finally, because even he could see that the record had closed every door his charm might have opened. That was the moment it truly ended for Trevor, not when I walked in, but when he understood that talking, the one weapon he had, no longer worked because I had built my case entirely out of things that could not be talked away. And a smooth man who meets a wall of documents is just a man, in the end, with nowhere left to go. If you have made it this far, let me ask you the question I had to answer in that room, because it was not as simple as it looked. I had them. Completely. I could have destroyed them both, Trevor with a referral to the authorities for his self-dealing and fraud, Sean with public exposure and whatever legal consequences his part invited, and I could have done it with a clean conscience because they had earned every bit of it. Or I could calibrate, could remove the threat and protect the company and the people without burning every possible thing to the ground, could distinguish, even now, between the man who did this coldly for profit and the broken brother who was led into it. Total destruction or measured justice. And the brother in the equation made it the hardest choice of my life. Tell me in the comments what you would have done to the partner and, separately, to the brother, because I suspect your answers to those two are different, and I suspect the difference is the whole moral heart of this. Here is what I did. Trevor I removed completely and without mercy, and I make no apology for it. I removed him from the company that morning, stripped of every position and authority, and I turned the documented evidence of his self-dealing and his attempted fraud over to the appropriate authorities and to Sterling Partners' own lawyers, who were, I assure you, extremely interested to learn that the man who had been marketing them a company had never had the power to sell it and had concealed that fact throughout. Trevor's scheme did not just fail, it detonated on him. His reputation, in an industry that is smaller than it looks, did not survive the story of the COO who tried to sell his comatose partner's company out from under him and got caught when the partner woke up. The deal was dead, killed by the vault, and Trevor was finished, killed by his own paper, and I did not lose a moment's sleep over it, because Trevor was not broken or led astray. Trevor was a cold and deliberate man who looked at his partner's dying body and saw a payday, and the world is better and my company is safer with men like that removed from it. And mercy for the merciless is not virtue. It is just fear wearing virtue's coat. Sean was different, and Sean is where the story stops being about a company at all. I did not have Sean prosecuted. I could have. His part in the incapacity petition, the coordination with Trevor, arguably exposed him to real legal jeopardy, and there were people advising me, including some who loved me, who said I should let the law have him, that blood or no blood, he had tried to bury me alive for money and deserved whatever came. And I sat with that for a long time, longer than I sat with anything about Trevor. And in the end I did not do it, and I want to tell you why, because it is not what you might think. I did not spare Sean out of mercy exactly, or not only mercy. I spared him because I understood, looking at my brother across that table, that the cruelest and most exact justice available to me was not prison. It was the truth. It was making Sean live for the rest of his life with the knowledge of what he had done and what it had cost him, which was everything, because I removed him from the company, cut off the money and the title and the borrowed importance that had been the whole of his adult life, everything I had ever given him, and I sent him back to being what he was before I lifted him, which was a lost, weak man with nothing, except that now he would carry, on top of the nothing, the knowledge that he had. Thrown away a brother's love and a brother's lifetime of protection for a payday that never came, that he had signed a paper declaring his own brother dead, and that his brother had woken up and known and looked at him and chosen not even to bother destroying him, because there was nothing left to destroy that Sean had not already destroyed himself. I gave Sean back his nothing, and I let him keep his freedom, so that he would have a long life in which to understand exactly what he had traded it for. I did speak to him once, alone, after that meeting, because I owed the boy I raised at least that, even if I owed the man he became nothing. And I will tell you what I said, because it is the truest thing in this whole story. I said, Sean, I heard you, in the coma. I heard your voice say, "We go around Anna." I don't know how, but I heard it and I carried it up out of the dark with me, and for a while I thought I dreamed it, and then Anna told me it was real. So I want you to know that I know, not from a document, but from your own voice at my bedside, exactly what you are. I raised you. I gave you everything I had. And when I was helpless, you looked at me and you saw money. I'm not going to have you arrested. I'm not going to destroy you. I'm just going to let you go back to nothing, and you're going to live the rest of your life knowing that your big brother heard you from inside a coma and lived, and that the last thing between us is you standing over my dying body doing sums. That's all. Go on now. I've got a company to run and a wife to make it up to, and I don't have any more time for you. And Sean cried and reached for me and said my name, and I did not hate him. That is the strange thing. In that moment I did not hate my brother at all. I just felt an ocean of grief and a terrible finality. And I stepped back from his reaching hand, and I turned around and I walked back into my life, and I have not spoken to Sean since, and I do not expect to again, and that is its own kind of death, the death of a brother who is still alive, and I grieve it, and I would not undo my choice, and both of those are true. Our mother, who raised us both, who worked herself to exhaustion so that her two boys might have more than she did, died believing that the best thing she had ever done was make her sons close, make us each other's keepers, because she knew she would not always be there and she wanted us to have each other. On her deathbed, years before any of this, she took my hand and Sean's hand and put them together and said, "You look after each other. That's all I ask. Whatever happens, you're brothers, and brothers look after each other." And I promised her, and I kept the promise, for the rest of her life and well beyond it, looked after Sean at every turn, exactly as she asked. And I am so glad, that my mother did not live to see what her younger son did with the closeness she'd worked her whole life to build, did not live to see him stand over his brother's dying body and reach not to look after him but to profit from his death. That would have broken her, and she had been broken enough by life, and it is the one mercy in this whole story, that she was already gone and could not see it. Sometimes I think the person Sean really betrayed was not me but her, our mother, the promise she extracted with her dying breath. And I think that if there is any justice beyond the humankind, Sean will have to answer for that promise someday to her, and I would not want to be him in that conversation. I kept your promise, Mama. I looked after him his whole life. I could not make him keep it back. Some things a brother cannot do for a brother, and making him a good man was, it turned out, one of them, though God knows I tried and you tried, and between us it should have been enough, and it wasn't, and that is a grief I will carry to my own deathbed, where I hope to take your hand again and tell you I did everything I could. My name is David Keller. Let me tell you where it all landed, and then the one thing I learned that I most need you to carry. Corvus survived, and more than survived. The Sterling deal died, which meant the company I had built was not gutted and sold for parts, which meant the people who worked there, the hundreds of families whose livelihoods depended on Corvus, kept their jobs, and I want you to understand that this, not my own vindication, is the part one I'm proudest of, because Trevor's deal would have enriched Trevor and a handful of others and cost hundreds of ordinary people their security, and the vault I built didn't just protect me, it protected all of them, every one of them, most of whom never knew how close they came to being sold. I went back to running the company, slowly at first, then fully, and it is thriving now, and I have restructured it further, learned every lesson the accident taught, and built it to be even more resistant to exactly the kind of predation that nearly took it. Because if there is one thing I now know in my bones, it is that the time to build the wall is while the sun is shining, because you never get to choose when the truck comes. And I rewarded the ones who held the line, because a man who does not reward loyalty as thoroughly as he punishes betrayal has learned only half the lesson. Nadia Rahman, my CFO, who risked everything to be loyal to a man everyone said was gone, is my second in command now, in the role Trevor once held, with real authority and real equity, and she has earned every bit of it, and I trust her in a way I will now admit I never should have trusted Trevor, because Nadia's loyalty was tested in the dark when there was nothing in it for her and passed, and that is the only kind of loyalty that is actually real, the kind proven when the person you're loyal to can't see you and can't reward you and might never wake up. Howard, my old friend, my trustee, the man who told my sleeping body the wall's holding, I cannot reward because Howard did it for friendship and would be insulted by payment, so instead I simply love him and tell him so, which I had not done often enough before a coma taught me how short the time is. And Anna, who fought a war for me while I slept, who held the line against my brother and my partner with nothing but her refusal and her faith, who never once agreed to bury me. Anna, I spend the rest of my life trying to be worth, which is what I was already trying to do before the accident, except that now I understand, in a way I never did before, exactly what I have, exactly what it is worth, and exactly how close I came to learning that lesson too late to use it. Because that is the strange gift buried inside this terrible story. And it is the thing I most want to give you. I got to find out. Almost no one does. Almost everyone goes their whole life without ever truly knowing who around them is real and who is performing, who would hold the line in the dark and who would reach for their throat, because the test never comes, or comes only at the very end when it's too late to do anything with the answer. I got the test early enough to act on it. I found out, while I still had decades left to live, that my partner and my brother were hollow, and that my wife and my CFO and my old friend were solid gold, and I got to reorganize my entire life around that knowledge, to pour myself into the real ones and cut loose the false ones, to stop wasting my limited days on people who would have sold me for parts. That is a gift, a brutal one, wrapped in the worst thing that ever happened to me, but a gift, and I have decided to treat it as one. The accident took 11 weeks of my life and nearly all of it. It gave me back the truth about everyone, and the truth, however much it costs, is always worth having, because you cannot build a real life on a false map of who people are, and most people are working from a false map their whole lives and never know it. So here is the one thing I learned, and I will give it to you plainly. You do not know who people are until they believe you cannot see them. That is the whole of it. Everyone is loyal when you are watching, when you are powerful, when there is something to be gained from your regard. Character is not what people do in the light. Character is what they do in the dark, when they are certain you will never know, when you are unconscious in a bed or dead in a grave or simply out of the room, and the only way to ever truly know a person is to see, somehow, what they did when they were sure it was safe to be their real selves. I got to see. And what I want you to take from my seeing is this: pay attention to the small dark moments, the time someone thinks you're not looking, the way they treat people who can do nothing for them, the way they talk about you when you've left the room, because those, not the grand loyal gestures made in the light, are the true readout of a soul. And build your wall while the sun shines, structure your life, your work, your affairs, so that if the worst comes, if the truck comes, the people who would reach for your throat cannot reach it, because you will not always be awake to protect what you've built, and the love and the caution you put in place while you're strong are the only things that will guard it when you're not. I built a vault out of fear 2 years before I needed it, and it saved my company and hundreds of jobs and possibly my life, and I did not even know when I built it what I was building it against. Build yours. You don't get to choose when the truck comes. So let me leave you with the question I have carried since I woke up, and let me ask it plainly. If you found out, the way I found out, exactly who divided everything among themselves the moment they believed you were gone, who reached for your throat and who held the line, what would you do with that knowledge? Would you destroy the ones who betrayed you, or would you do the harder thing, and simply see them clearly, and cut them loose, and pour what's left of your life into the ones who proved real? And if the one who betrayed you was your own brother, the one you raised, does blood change what you owe him, or does it only make the wound deeper? Tell me in the comments, honestly, because I think there are more people carrying a Sean than anyone admits, someone they lifted their whole life who reached for their throat in the dark, and they need to hear from each other tonight that surviving it is possible, that the vault can hold, that the ones who love you really will keep vigil, and that finding out who people are, however much it costs, is a gift and not only a wound. They divided my company while I lay dying, and they never knew I had built it so that dying couldn't give it to them. But the company was never really the thing I got back. What I got back was the truth about everyone I loved, and a wife who kept vigil against the dark, and the knowledge, bought at the price of nearly everything, that you find out who people are only when they think you can't see them. Watch the dark, build the wall, and hold on to the ones who tell your sleeping body the wall's holding. Just come back. Those are the only ones who were ever real.